Everybody, welcome to the Blue Heart Podcast with Lieutenant Joe Pangaro. So, today we're going to talk about an understanding of something that I think is very important for all of us in law enforcement when it comes to investigating sexual assaults. What does consent mean? How is it supposed to be given? Who gets it? That kind of thing. All right, but first, let's remember our sponsors, Blue 360 Media, my publisher. They're awesome. RiotTint.com. They make safety film for windows and doors at your schools and businesses. That's fantastic. MedicalEssentialDiagnostics.com. They are a provider of health screenings for all first responders in the state of New Jersey. Go check them out. No cost to you. Make sure you're healthy. Do the right thing. And our newest sponsor here is Dubby Energy Drinks. www.dubby.gg. They sponsor the program. They love law enforcement, so they're good. All right, so the concept of consent, I guess we all kind of get the idea from a consent search. You stop a car and you believe that there's some kind of contraband in the vehicle and you want to search the vehicle. So you ask for consent. Hi, I'd like to search your car. Hi, I'd like to search your backpack. Hi, I'd like to search your pockets, whatever it is. So, a couple of important things we need to remember is that when we're asking for consent to search, we have to ask for consent to search, not to take a look, not do you mind if I go through your backpack? Do you mind if I look in your pockets? Do you mind if I search? Words mean things. And if we don't use the right words when it comes up for court, you're going to have a problem, especially around video, right? So that's something we want to do. So consent, the idea is that you're asking to be able to do something from somebody, and then they have a right to tell you that you can do it or you can't, or they can limit what you do. Yes, you can search, but you can't look in that bag in my back seat. You can search everywhere else, but not there, right? So they can limit what you can do. When it comes to a sexual assault investigation, the idea of consent is going to sometimes be central to what went on between two people. Now, it doesn't matter if it's man and man, woman and woman, doesn't matter. It's did two people engage in sexual activity and was there consent to engage in that activity? So the best of all worlds would be just like in our consent to search, there would be a form that people would fill out. Yes, I consent to do A, I'll do B, but I'm not doing C, and everybody signs off on it. That would be great. And believe it or not, in some colleges, they actually have sexual activity consent forms, right? Because you get in there and then somebody changes their mind, somebody's intoxicated, they're not sure. And the next day they feel bad, they shouldn't have done it, and they say, "Oh, I got assaulted," and it starts a whole kind of a big problem. So we want to make sure that we understand when it comes to um, sexual activity, the consent is given. Now, a lot of times, do people sit down and go, "Listen, I would really like to do this. Would you agree to that?" No, what happens is people start to engage in activity, and you know what happens. You get carried away, and next thing you know, but you can tell when somebody wants you to stop. You could tell they're uncomfortable, right? So they might say, "Oh, I don't want to stop. I'm not into that," or push the hand away or something like that. So when we look at that, when we gauge that with our suspects and our victims, you want to find out what specifically was there any agreement on what they were going to do. Now, you might say, that's ridiculous. Well, people do. They do agree on things. So we want to make sure we get it right. So did they agree on things verbally? Did they do it in writing? Was it a college thing? Where is that form? If it's not, the idea of consent is just like all ideas of consent, whether it's a search or sexual activity or anything else. The person that is being asked to do something has to fully understand what it is that they're being asked to do. And then they have to have the ability to say no, right? Or to limit what you want to do. So when someone is intoxicated, can they give consent? Well, we know this happens a lot, right? In the real world, when we're out there, everybody's drinking, you're at a bar, you're at a party, everyone's intoxicated, you end up in a room somewhere, and everybody starts engaging in sexual activity, and it starts to happen. And the consent there is usually done by agreement. You just see people agree. They start doing things, they get physical, and that's that. The problem with that, of course, is the next day when people say, "Oh, geez, I didn't want to do that. I shouldn't have engaged in that." And then they change their mind or they don't think they gave consent. And that's a much murkier water that you have to go through to do a good investigation. So the bottom line here is we got to keep this in mind. No means no. Doesn't matter what anything else that happens here. If somebody engages to say kissing, right? I'm willing to kiss. They're going to make out in the back seat of the car. All right, but they don't want to do anything else. Just because they then engaged in making out doesn't mean, well, that was their consent, so I can do whatever I want. And a lot of people think that, and that's how they get themselves in trouble. No means no. In the middle of the act, someone can say, I changed my mind. I want you to stop. And a lot of people will make jokes. Oh yeah, when I'm finished, you'll stop. No, if somebody says no, you stop right then and there. If somebody is uncomfortable before you're starting, you don't do it. So you have to really clarify what went on before there was any kind of sexual activity. Was there consent given? Did the person understand? If they're intoxicated, in general, intoxicated people can't give consent because they're intoxicated, especially if they're passed out, right? If somebody's well, she didn't say no, and we laugh, right? That sounds funny. Oh, that's a funny joke. It's not funny. I've investigated dozens of cases where somebody was intoxicated, passed out, and could not stop somebody, and they went along with exactly that stupid idea. Well, she didn't say no, and that's not a consent. That's not a valid consent. So when you get consent, you want to make sure when you're talking to people, what led you to believe that he or she was okay with this activity? Did they specifically talk? Did they tell you no at any time? When you're talking to the person who's reporting being sexually assaulted, what did you say to indicate you didn't want to start having this activity, or you wanted to stop the activity? What did you say and do? What was the person's mental state? Were they under the influence of alcohol or drugs? Were they passed out? Those kind of things. So the idea of consent is extremely important, especially when you get into some cases where two people, they like each other, they get along, maybe they meet out at the bar, they meet at a club, they meet at a party, and they decide to go off together for a little personal time. But then it gets out of control, and it can step over the line from consensual activity to now sexual assault. And you, as the law enforcement officer, have got to make sure what is what. So consent is very, very important. Know your ages of consent in your state, right? Because every state is different. So in New Jersey, the age of consent is 16. A young person at 16 can consent to have sexual activity with any person they want. And sex with a 60-year-old, a 30-year-old, whatever. But it has to be under certain parameters, right? You can't do that with somebody who's in loco parentis, a teacher, a counselor, a religious person. So you get all those facts. Who was the person that was involved with this 16-year-old or 17-year-old? And then there's ages of consent and things that kids can do when they're under 16, right? Within 4 years, it's usually of their birthdays of each other. So you want to know your state laws and do that. And the last thing we'll talk about, and I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. When we look at these things, let's look at the idea of the fresh complaint witness, the fresh complaint witness. A fresh complaint witness in any kind of an instance is the first person that the victim told about what happened. So if someone is reporting that they were sexually assaulted, and it's the next morning, they were upset, they didn't know what to do, and the next morning they realized this was bad, I'm going to call the police. But first they call a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a cousin, a neighbor, and they tell them, here's what happened. That fresh complaint witness, you want to identify who that is as quickly as possible and then get a statement from them, because often the fresh complaint witness will get the true story from the victim. And I don't mean victims lie. Sometimes they do. But the reality is, what that means is that a person that you reach out to when you're upset, there's more opportunity there for you to just tell the whole truth. Well, listen, I went to the bar, I met this guy, I liked him, I met this girl, I liked her. We went home to her apartment, I was fooling around, I was okay with that. I did this, but then I told him to stop, or I told her to stop, and she wouldn't, right? Where the story you get might be a little different because they're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to say, I didn't consent at all, I would never do that, and this and that and the other thing. So this is a very sexual assault is a very difficult type of a crime to investigate. We have to be thorough. We have to be complete. We have to be compassionate. We have to understand the human dynamics that go into people interacting with each other. So do a good job. find out about consent, make sure consent was given and it was appropriately given and it was understood, and then look for that fresh complaint witness. All right, everybody, remember our sponsors here. They help us to keep the show going. And like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Be careful out there. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.